Hello, MouseHunt. Welcome to Feedback Friday. It is, what is it? It's August 25. There we go. It's August 25, 2023. My name's Dave. Hopefully everybody in the chat is doing well. Hello to everybody. Daniel and Mad Cat both meowing hello. Well, I guess meow right back at you. Seemed appropriate for Mad Cat at least. Arctic, hello to you. Nathan, sound so low to the music die. Turn it up a little bit at the end there just for you, Nathan. Hopefully you're hearing it. Hopefully you're vibing. To Impress You, I believe, is the name of that MouseHunt track. Arctic thought it sounded fine. Hello, Jonathan. Greetings from East Yorkshire. Well, welcome in, Jonathan. Hope you're doing well. And Arctic, greetings from West Yorkshire. All right, well, we got both ends covered. Narwhal, welcome on in. Tarako, good morning to you. Hank, the whiteboard is so clean. Yeah, I did clean it a while ago, and I have yet to really brainstorm anything on there. So it's all clear. Lady Nutsy, welcome in. Fernandez says, ignore Mad Cat. Uh-oh. Well, Roger, hello. Well, today, thought we would do something a little bit different. Earlier in the week, I was kind of thinking, okay, what can we go over on Feedback Friday this week? And we'd already touched base on the roadmap a little bit. We'd already looked at the King's giveaway not too long ago. A couple weeks ago. That's kind of the next thing coming up. So, we already spoke about that, shared some of the progress on this modular HUD stuff as well a couple weeks ago. And so I was asking Jacob, I don't know, do you want to do an illustration or do you have any ideas what we could do? And he mentioned that a lot of times when he's doing an illustration, there's curiosity around kind of the creative process of putting that together, as well as just the game in general. And so that was a pretty neat idea Jacob had. So we kind of put together just a little bit of a behind the scenes look of how does an idea start and how does that end up in the game. Kind of, just nothing too much in detail, but at least a high level overview of, quite often just somebody has a fun idea and, how does that mature? How does that grow into something fully fledged that eventually is polished, released into the game and players are playing it. So I thought we'd go through there, see what interesting curiosities, questions come up from players. As well as, hey, just, if, as a feedback question, is this the type of stuff you like to see on Feedback Friday? I know we've done similar things in the past. I remember when the Floating Islands launched, I think we did a bit of a retrospective and looked at kind of how it started and how it came to be by the end of it, as well as the original Folklore Forest release. I think we did as well. We looked through some concept art, some early gameplay iterations, kind of how the area came together and what have you. But I thought we would do it in a bit of a generic manner and see what players think as well. Arctic, please let me get a Leppy. That's always the hope with every giveaway. As will the leprechaun visit your trap on that fine day. But without further ado here, I went through, kind of spent yesterday afternoon a little bit of time, kind of poured through some of the different prototypes we've put together, grab a few screenshots, and try my best to maybe encapsulate a little bit of the creative process that goes on behind the game, see if players are interested in that at all, and just kind of high-level phases. And one of the first things is obviously coming up with the idea to start with, and it's pretty fluid process for sure, and it has many different origin stories. Sometimes it's a private message or something like that. Sometimes it's just something you say in passing. I can remember long ago just walking out to maybe go get lunch. We're going to go, it's Friday, we're going to go get our lunch and bring it back to the office. And while you're walking there and back, somebody has a fun idea and it just kind of organically happens. Or sometimes people type up a small proposal, share it with the team, be in a Google document somewhere and people start commenting on it in the different sections. But really it often just starts small. It's the term elevator pitch. Something that you can share in the time it takes to ride an elevator up a few floors. And that kind of just see if it has any merit. Does it spark some creative inspiration? Do people start to get around it and get excited to talk about it? That's often a good sign that you're onto something. And when it gets to that point where it has that excitement, kind of passes that initial test, and then we start prototyping it a little bit. And it's a great way to explore the idea. Often it's a much better way to even share and communicate the idea with others as well. It's a lot easier to just visualize it, share it, and kind of click around and get a sense of what you're thinking. Fernandez says, proposal. Indeed. Fernandez, nothing matures in MouseHunt, eh? But, I went through and I grabbed a few prototypes that we've had over the years. Some Mosu Picchu one came to mind from many years ago. And you can see it's nothing really too much to look at. Even that one, literally, you click different types of cheese, and that makes you hunt with that cheese, so you can see the progress bars go up and down. Often you'll spot some rough edges, things you didn't think of when you're just writing it down on paper and you're brainstorming, you're ideating. It isn't until it comes to life a little bit that maybe a few of the mechanics kind of show like, this doesn't really work. I think we got to go back to the drawing board or rethink things as well. Hey, welcome in, Michelle. Nice to see you. Mason, welcome in as well. Happy Friday to you also. That right prototype looks cool. Wonder when it makes it into the game, eh? Well, the one in the middle was the Bristlewoods Rift, and the one, I don't know if it's my right or your right, but the one with the Eclipse mouse was the Valor Rift. And actually, that's an example of that iteration. It was one of the kind of the failed ones that just didn't end up being particularly fun. And I think that original iteration, you would capture the Eclipse, and then next time you start your run, you could choose to do a Prestige 2 run, and everything was twice as difficult. And then that would unlock Prestige 3. And so it was more when you enter the tower, you choose, like, what difficulty level do you want to try? And you could try any Prestige level that you've unlocked. So whenever you set a new high score, it would unlock one more Prestige level. And after playing around with it, it just kind of had some rough edges because it always ended in failure at some point, right? You would always pick something and you wouldn't always necessarily end in victory. And so that provided some creative feedback where we iterated a little bit, and we ultimately landed on something where no matter what, you go as high as you can, and that's how high you got, and you can kind of celebrate how far you made it each time, rather than eventually the last thing that always happens in your run is the Eclipse mouse kind of defeating you, and you feel like you didn't quite finish it. And I think, let's see, I don't know if this is going to work. Do we have, yeah, even... So you can kind of see, failing to catch a whole lot here. Something pretty simple, nothing too groundbreaking, but it helps communicate the idea. It makes you think about things, what is standard cheese going to do in Mouse Picchu versus what is Glowing Gruyere going to do in Mouse Picchu. And sometimes those are the things you don't think about until it's a little bit more real in some sense. And you can use placeholder assets. You notice the lantern oil here instead of fireball fuel. So see, fireball fuel wouldn't quite exist yet. Even things like experiencing, collecting a little bit of loot. What happens, how does it feel when I turn off that fireball fuel? If I make the dragon cheese, how does it feel to hunt with both and have both the bars go up at the same time? Sometimes it just, you experience it different than it felt on paper. We can actually kind of see some gameplay feedback, at least in a rudimentary fashion. Azaku, welcome in. Happy Friday to you as well. Morning, Jason. But even some different iterations as well. Sometimes it's not an entire area. I know when the Bristlewoods Rift was kind of getting wrapped up, we weren't really liking how the Acolyte Chamber worked. And so we even kind of spitballed different ways it could work. Eventually we ended on the way the obelisk is set up there, or the obelisk. There's some different iterations that didn't see the light of day. A version where you'd go in and the Acolyte had these 3 shields and you had to drop each one. But if you left the room, anyone that wasn't completely dropped would heal back up to full. So you had to kind of choose. If you didn't think you had enough sand, you'd leave the chamber, come back. And ultimately that would feel good, but it didn't quite end up making it in. And then even an earlier iteration of kind of exploring what could King's Crowns do in the Bristlewoods Rift before the loot box changed, showing up, and the Acolyte would have these waves of minions protecting them. But if you're in a Bronze Crown, it would just start and wipe out the whole first wave. So as you earned a King's Crown for the Acolyte mouse, you got to go in with less sand and got to be able to capture the Acolyte using a lot less of that sand as well. In Queso Geyser, just, again, grabbed a few different examples of kind of prototypes and ones that made it in. You kind of see just a lot of clicking, getting a sense of the pressure building phase. Some wonderful animations, just moving boxes around. Yeah, feeling great. Even maybe some more recent ones as well, like the Great Winter Hunt. And, I have a lot of fond memories, actually, of this one coming together and just kind of sitting on a call with a screen share going. And we'd be playing through the Winter Hunt. And this is one that did go through quite a bit of iteration to try to get something that we were eventually happy with. But I can remember just sitting on that call. There'd be, I don't know, between 2 or 4 of us at any one time, people coming in and out, and just kind of hashing through some of those rough edges that it had to kind of smooth those out and find something that ultimately we found fun. Halloween's always a fun one because you can just go wild with the tacky color schemes of orange, purple, and green. But the boiling cauldron as well was one that was put together, kind of was prototyped. And, I remember that one too, going through a few iterations to try to find the right feeling for everything. Even perhaps most recently, the beanstalk prototype. That was one that iterated a little bit as well. It's kind of interesting little nugget over on the side there. Instantly fly to the next room, kind of before that eventually got refined into becoming leaping lavish. But originally it was these wings that would lift you up and just carry you to the end of the room. But ultimately there wasn't a lot of hunting to do. It didn't really feel as interesting when we played through it that way. And it's another good example of it looked good on paper, but it wasn't until we could experience it in at least a slightly gamified way. It doesn't have all the bells and whistles to it. That sometimes it changes minds on some things, or you kind of experience it a little bit differently. Is that Jack? Indeed. Well, you can also tell some of the inspiration is Jack and the Beanstalk, and so the pointer being Big Jack kind of felt natural there to at least use that as a placeholder. But then there's certainly some things as well that, hey, the whole point of the prototyping is some things hit the cutting room floor. And, there's no shortage of those as well. As I pour through that folder, there's a whole bunch of prototypes that never saw the light of day. Even something here, I think it's a bingo card, and you're trying to make a straight line. So almost like a little bit of a riff on treasure maps, where you could kind of choose the order you want to do with it. And actually, that was a little bit of fun, but it was an idea that maybe we keep in the idea bank until we have the right time and place for it. You're kind of knocking down some dominoes, or I think the inspiration here was kind of a carnival style event. I think we were working on maybe an iteration of the birthday, and it would be kind of like those stacked up milk jugs, and you throw a baseball and you're trying to knock down the jugs. A horse race as well, and I think that kind of ran into it. Didn't really feel like you're playing MouseHunt as much. It started to get a little bit contrived where it was fun, but it didn't have a lot to do with hunting mice, collecting loot, and then doing something with that loot to collect different mice. As well as one that probably set the record of going through the most iterations. And that one down in the corner, there were some different roving like thieves and different kind of gangs of mice. And that was actually before the floating islands. Originally, the launch pad was supposed to be this entire city. And you had to restore it and restore justice back to the city. It's going to be a law area. And then once you secured the launch site, all the deliveries coming in and out were sent by a dirigible. That would unlock the floating islands. But alas, that didn't quite pan out. And we pivoted into, okay, Machu Picchu is kind of what leads into the floating islands from there. But it's an example of, hey, that's part of the prototyping process as well. A lot of ideas never get out of that sort of pencil and paper phase where it's just kind of a pitch, an idea written down, and then some things don't make it out of that prototype phase. It just kind of goes to show sometimes it seems good on paper, but once you play it a little bit, maybe it doesn't start to go together all that well. What kind of fuel does a horse use, says Fernandez. Well, I don't know. I don't know if we got that far on that particular idea. But then once all that's established there, and that's kind of the moment where we think we've decided, okay, something has some legs now. We fleshed it out, we ideated, we brainstormed, and we built a very rudimentary version of it. And those prototypes go a long way to making sure it works, kind of fleshing out the idea. Things that ultimately don't have a lot of potential, they kind of get cut in that prototype phase. Prototypes are great as well for sharing with the rest of the team. Just to kind of, picture's worth 1,000 words. You can sit there and explain how something works, but it's just not as effective as letting someone experience it for themselves. So we basically at this point decided, all right, this thing has merit. We think we want to make it. And the next step is kind of writing down, all right, let's at least a first draft. These are always living documents, these design documents. But at least they act as sort of a launching point where we kind of check all the boxes a little bit. We start to think about a little bit more the nitty-gritty details of the area, with the end goal of helping scope this thing out. Just how big or small of a release is it? How much work is it going to be put together? We start thinking about things like reward structure, the number of mice we need, items and everything like that as well. We start to touch on narrative as well. That's kind of a little bit of vetting of how we want to tie this into the storyline. Kind of get everybody on the same page there as well. because that may affect a lot of the creative direction. Get into just thinking ahead a little bit about some of the problems that may need to be solved either through interface design or through programming. An example from the labyrinth, how are we going to portray where you are in those hallways? Kind of just giving a little bit of creative thought to that, to at least have a launching spot before we start doing mock-ups, as well as programming. Kind of an important part is, well, some of the mechanics, explaining them in a way where we can better understand how much work is it to program. And when a programmer sits down to start writing code, well, they have to know how it works to know how to code it, right? How many legs does the fueled horse have? Oh boy. And from beyond there as well, with the goal of scoping it out, thinking about things like how many areas are there, how many types of cheese. I grabbed a couple examples from, I think, the original Folklore Forest as well as Queso Geyser. It'd be important to know how many items are we going to make, how many types of cheese. This is also a good moment where it's kind of beneficial if we can start to think of some names, some names of what we're going to call these. Often when we're prototyping, you might even notice some things were just called a MacGuffin, or some things just had a question mark next to it, or like reward item. And we start to firm that up as well. And it's kind of a way to vet the narrative a little bit. And it's also invaluable as we start to develop it that we can all use the same language as we go back and forth. Helps when we're naming variables, files, coming up with characters, incorporating, maybe something that a mouse is going to drop. We can incorporate that item that they're holding in their hand. Little details like that are just kind of nice to flesh out ahead of time because it can affect the overall creative vision. And again, visualizing things is just so effective as well. Like those little mock-ups and sketches. This is when we start doing a lot of concept art. And it's very beneficial for the art team as well. They can kind of start to agree on color palettes. Kind of rough tone of what these characters are going to look like. When you have 5 different artists all illustrating something, it really helps to produce a cohesive end product if you have some concept art to go by. Exactly, Potato. Reward the thingy. Yeah. Okay, so the Queso Geyser. As well as kind of some of the environment artwork. This is some rough sketches. Actually, these are pretty fleshed out sketches, I'd say, of when Jacob was looking to put together the map. In the times we can do stuff like this as well, it even just serves for creative inspiration for the area as a whole. Just brings it to life a little bit. And even just seeing some of this artwork to come together is often what gets it, just builds enthusiasm and excitement to work on the area as well. It kind of gets the creative juices flowing. I know from the Sky Palace release, we were playing around, okay, what's the fuel going to be before we settled on storm cells? And we were kind of going through a lot of different iterations there as well. Even, this idea of I'm going to put rocket boosters on a dirigible. And, we're kind of defying some laws of physics a little bit. I don't know how well that would work. But, by sketching it out, does it fit the sort of whimsical, over-the-top nature of MouseHunt, where things don't always have to make sense, as long as they kind of look like they could make some sense. And so there's some kind of just vetting of those ideas, exploring, what could the storm cell item be? You can see, Jacob was sketching up different kind of condensed fuel sources and what have you as well. And last but not least is, actually not last but not least, but the most lengthy phase of all perhaps is production. We got to make this area. So we've done all of our ideation, we've written it down, we've scoped it out. We've done things like how many types of cheese do we need? And this is, when now kind of the team all has that game plan, we all have a strong creative vision for what we're going to make. And, we have to start doing things like scheduling. And, that's why that design document is invaluable to figure out, well, how long is this going to take to create? I grabbed a quick example from the Folklore Forest. You can kind of see, hey, it was December 2021 when we started to have some tasks scheduled up. And it wasn't until, the end of September 2022 when maps were all done, everything, all said and done. So, it was over about a 10-month process to put together the original Folklore Forest. And this is a great tool for us as well, because it helps, divvy up work, assess who's going to do what. As well, it's always a feedback mechanism that we get a sense of, are we on schedule or are we falling behind? It's better to know sooner than later. If you just kind of say, I'm going to be done on this day, then often you don't realize that you're behind until the due date's coming up. And so it's breaking down one big, scary, intimidating project into many small little projects. And that just goes a lot smoother to kind of take a lot of work and just break it down into something smaller. I got to sound my horn though. I was hoping somebody would take me on a hunt. I'm going to take myself on a hunt. Yo, Fleming, welcome in. Hope you're doing well. John, welcome in as well. You've been playing since 2010. Well, glad to hear you've been having some fun. Be epic to create animation for all the traps for the mouse. Alas, I don't think that would ever happen. There's just too many traps in the game to do it, alas. Can you please sound the horn? I took care of it, Fleming. MX, was there any production places that were completely scrapped last minute, never made it so that you could show, eh? No, I don't think so. Nothing comes to mind. And that's part of the prototyping, the ideation phase, is that's something would be rather devastating to happen, is you completely finish something, or get pretty close to finishing something and then you scrap the whole thing. That's a lot of wasted time, effort, and energy that, could have been realized. And so it's always an iterative process. By all means, even we make that document, but like I said, it's a living document. It's one that changes, it evolves over time. Even post-release, one of the things we do is we go back to that original design document and we read through it one more time. We add in any details that were added during testing, any iterations we made. We add in some of the final art. It's especially important for events that we might repeat the next year, because then, okay, great. We can go and look, okay, Halloween 2022, how did it work? Cool, now it's time to look at 2023 and we incorporate the feedback from the previous year. But it's just nice to write down how did something end up being. I'm a strong independent hunter, right? No, I think most often my friends are taking me on a hunt. Wilson, Sunken City dive headings, how far along did that get? I'd say that never really got out of the ideation. I don't even think that made it to the prototype phase, to be honest. But even kind of compare and contrast, this is kind of like a high-level overview of the folklore forest. But what's really helpful for us as well, we kind of have a blend of agile methodologies as well as traditional kind of waterfall. And that's especially effective with the artwork, because in every MouseHunt release, there's just a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of art assets that have to be illustrated, have to have descriptions written for them. They have to be created into the game by a programmer, etc. And so everything kind of needs to be individually tracked to make sure we didn't miss an item or anything like that. And so you just kind of see, breaking down everything, like every mouse that needs to be illustrated, every item that needs to be illustrated. And then in sort of broader scope, things like the HUD are a little bit more open-ended things, but we're just trying to break them down into smaller, easier to digest things. Like first we have to do kind of some mock-ups and design work, and then we kind of try to get a rough cut of it. If I can borrow an expression from the film industry, getting that rough cut version of the HUD in place where you can experience the whole area from start to finish. But there's a lot of missing bells and whistles. Just like in a film, maybe there's some missing CGI and some of the audio and the music hasn't been mixed in yet. But you can experience the story from start to end. And a lot of times that helps identify some sticking points before we kind of commit to sitting down and doing that final cut, rendering final assets and kind of getting everything written in ink. And so even things like this is an example of a little bit of a rough cut version of a HUD where there's certainly a lot of missing elements, but the missing elements are things that would take a lot of time, effort, and energy to produce, such as the beautiful background illustrations in the beanstalk. And so kind of want to make sure, does this all work before an artist sits down and puts all that creative effort and time into rendering the background illustration? We want to make sure it works first so that we don't end up throwing away some really great art. Inevitably that tends to happen in any iterative process. A little bit of, work goes to waste, but we try to minimize that and just use it as part of the creative process. Those iterations helped us ultimately make a better final iteration on it. Grabbed a couple examples from the Sky Palace as well. I'm just trying to visualize, what's this thing going to look like? How am I going to pick to where I'm going to, go? Often, too, this helps when we're programming because we can look at a mock-up and kind of circle data points and kind of, okay, how do we model this thing now programmatically? How do we build the data layer for it? what parts of it are a player going to be able to interact with, and what parts of it are contained in the game engine. And only the game engine is allowed to mutate this state versus what things are a player allowed to click. Even gotten like the cute concepts here of how we're going to visualize the droids on the HUD. How are they working and how are they not working? Potato, can you show the first step of the area you're currently working on, eh? You know what? Would you believe the due date for that area is actually next week? So I don't think I have that too handy. But that might be a great, maybe we could do a little bit of a retrospective on it as well. Part of the feedback of this format, see, is this stuff hunters are interested in? Would you like to see this more often during Feedback Friday? Nathan, you're getting augmented reality vibes. I take it from this mock up there as well, eh? Sunny, glad to hear you've been enjoying the game. Swift, what do the artists do during the early phases of development? Do they only work on these creative mock-ups and concepts? Well, we usually have more than one thing on the go. But yeah, I mean, in the early stages of development, it's a lot of concept art going on. And our projects tend to overlap a lot. So maybe there's not a lot to be done like while we're working on the beanstalk. Maybe there's a little bit of a lull, but maybe Ronza's getting prepared at the same time. Another event, there's some other project on the go that needs art resources. And so just on a week-by-week basis, we'll touch base and we kind of divvy up tasks kind of no more than maybe 2 weeks ahead of time. And that just adds a little bit of flexibility. Even kind of going back when we're scheduling things a little bit, I kind of leave them a little bit open-ended. If there's 5 artists, if there's sort of a big project that has a lot of art needs, like the beanstalk, a piece of episodic content, requires probably the most art resources of pretty well any project we work on, might do something like schedule art for 3 artists every week. There's enough artwork for 3 artists to work on full time, because then it leaves 2 people free, either to help out with other projects, or if there's nothing else going on, they just start getting ahead on the next things, and then we start running ahead of schedule, which is always a nice feeling to have, and that leaves extra room at the end. Hey, maybe we add some extra polish, or there's some bonus features that now we have time for because we got a head of schedule on. Even big part of production as well are spreadsheets, number crunching, kind of modeling everything with numbers to know, okay, what are all this stuff we're going to punch in. There's a lot of minutia, a lot of detail goes into that. You gotta, once we've determined that here's all the mice we need, the roles they play, someone's got to come up with, well, how difficult to capture are all these mice? What do all their loot tables look like? Do they have effectiveness versus different power types? An example of the pirate chest down there. Well, what's going to be inside the pirate chest for the floating islands? Somebody has to kind of model all that, and then that all gets punched in, and then we have to play it and see. Okay, so sometimes things look good on paper, but they don't feel good when you actually go and experience it. Could be something like a 100% chance to get 5 of something is very similar to a 20% chance to get 1 of something. And it is until you punch in all those numbers and kind of play through it and get all that sense of feedback that you might, sway one way or the other. Sometimes it's like, you know what, I got unlucky a little bit too much. I think I want to reduce the quantity and increase the frequency of it happening. Things like that often come up. But it kind of starts with modeling the math side of things. I often kind of call that the logical side of the design, and then you got to go with the more emotional side. It's got to kind of make sense on paper, but it's got to feel good when you actually run through it as well. Fleming, you're heading out. Well, hey, thank you for popping in. Merc, was there ever a point the team realized, this game is getting complicated to develop after many years of easier areas? I think, part of it's been an iterative process, kind of as we kind of refine our approach. And, I think every release we do it a little bit differently than the one before it. I would definitely say, though, in the earlier years, things would change a lot more dramatically, and now it's kind of more about refining what we have. It's not often we have to completely reimagine things. Theta, glad to hear you've been enjoying this type of thing. It's very interesting, cool to see what goes into making a final product. That's good to know. It's part of the kind of feedback topic for today as well. Should we do a little bit more of this as well? Sonny, your favorite part is building spreadsheets as well, eh? Well, yeah, that's, there's some doozies out there. I think the floating islands may have set the record of probably the largest spreadsheet that we've created in terms of what goes into areas. Alex, I got something backwards. Oh, I already forget what I said backwards. A 100% chance to get 5 is the same as a 20% chance to get 1. Okay, there you go. That's the danger of me rattling off numbers quickly like that while staring at a spreadsheet full of other numbers. Yeah. But that's kind of the whole production cycle, and by then there's a testing phase as well, which we kind of have some different steps and things into there as we kind of run through QA, and often things kind of change. We always aim to kind of have at least the big picture pretty firm. There's some things that are just hard to change later down the road, but there's often a lot of fine tuning. Things like drop rates, reward structure, and kind of number tuning. A lot of that happens during testing, and it's just kind of once everything all comes together. That's often when you get the big picture. Something looks good in isolation, but then when you put it next to absolutely everything else going on, sometimes it needs a little bit of fine tuning. But that's even when it's all built, when it's all tested, and we're all happy with it, there's still a little bit of work left to be done, and that is actually releasing it, putting it out into the world, sharing it with players, and collecting feedback as well. That process has changed a little bit over the years, and there's pros and cons to it. But recently we've been releasing maps a little bit after an area comes out, and that's really helped us to gather feedback from players. No matter how much play testing we do, even if you get 20 people to play it for 100 hours each, as soon as we release it and 50,000 people all get to go through it, about in one day you have gotten a lot more play testing than you've done with just a small group, right? It's just a numbers thing, and just inevitably you just get an absolute tidal wave of more feedback than you ever could in a small group. And so, there's some things we've tried over the years, and most recently, at least the iteration we're on, is we released the maps a little bit later. It's great feedback to help influence the reward structure of maps. We might have some ideas of what we kind of want to do with those maps, and sometimes, hey, all the boxes get checked right from the get-go. We know we left room. We wanted keys and feathers for the beanstalk to be a big identity of the beanstalk treasure maps. And ultimately that worked out, but it was just kind of nice to see everyone go through it and kind of see in real time how they were being used, to see players are enjoying using them, and that just kind of firmed up some things as well. But even just beyond that, before it gets released, somebody has to put together one of the news posts that we do to announce content. That's been something that's kind of morphed and changed a little bit over the years. Often we'd put a lot of informational text there and kind of how things work in the news posts. But over the years, kind of realized, hey, if you're a hunter and you're starting the labyrinth today for the very first time, you're probably not going to go back 7 years and read a news post, right? The HUD should be what helps you figure out, how do I play this? And more often than not, you have more fun figuring things out by experiencing them rather than sort of studying them and memorizing it and then going and playing it. Just being able to jump in and learn from a few mistakes often goes a lot better. Because most of us learn by experience better than we do by kind of cramming. So the news posts have shifted a little bit there over the years. So we have to prepare the mobile builds, and actually that's a unique challenge as well. Once those get uploaded and approved, there's no taking them down for the most part. Or if there's a bug in a mobile build, we got to go through that whole process again. We got to patch the bug, re-upload. It takes time to be processed, to be approved, and be published in the App Store on Google Play. So that's kind of a unique challenge that comes up in testing. The emails as well, if you're subscribed to the newsletter, to help kind of get the word out. If you've been away from the game for a little bit, I know a lot of hunters like to receive an inbox notification when there's something new to come and try out, some new fun to be had. And even, I picked Jack there as well as an example of something that's relatively turnkey. There's still always just a little bit of work has to go into just even bringing Jack back. Somebody has to load it up, run through everything, make sure everything's still working, test everything, maybe restore some things, kind of firm up the dates as well, and then put together some of these things like a news post announcing when is Jack, when's she arriving, when does she leave, how does the shutdown phase work, prep those emails, do all that sort of thing. So even in relatively, repeating type events, there's always a little bit of work to be done. So it's one of those things that kind of, it's maybe a little bit more challenging than it appears on the surface. Nathan, do we make templates for places using the same mechanics? Seems like there's a lot of potential to streamline coding with the things you've made. There's a lot of reusable tools out there as well. And that's, from a technical perspective, something that's we've refined over the years. Some of the older areas use some older tools. We've actually been able to go and update some of those old areas just to kind of what we call technical debt, I guess is the right term for it. Like the Forbidden Grove was ancient, and it just used a really old mechanism of doing time-based gameplay. And it was great. Somebody had the opportunity to sit down for a week and just kind of bring it up to today's standards. Makes everything more stable, easier to test. Theta, what factors do you consider when doing balance changes? How do you reconcile the intended playstyle with the developed meta? Eh? I always perceive that as the ultimate compliment in design when players are better at playing it than you are. That means you've made a very interesting journey. You've made something nuanced that isn't just scripted. Games aren't meant to be do A, then B, then C. You don't experience it like a story. You're an active participant in the story, so you should be able to affect the outcome. And so, ultimately, that's the design goal, is to kind of have lots of different ways to go about things. But, for sure, sometimes it's a little bit surprising. Like the gameplay style of Find the Ultimate Room. It was not very fun, and that kind of, rekindled the creative inspiration behind Leaping Lavish. Is King's Giveaway releasing on the 5th? You know what, Arctic? I'm not looking at a calendar, and my great kryptonite is dates and times. So I'm not going to say the date from memory. I'm pretty sure I mentioned what day it was coming last time, though. MX, how often do we consider refactoring old areas? Not as often as I would like. That's one of the challenges of being a small team. But it's the type of thing we try to fit in, whenever we can. It's often, you just have to reassess priorities almost on a weekly basis to see, what resources do we have available right now, and, in the short term, and kind of do short-term planning that way. You kind of want to get the long-term planning fairly established, at least big picture stuff, but you just want to be flexible. So on any given week, if somebody has extra art cycles, you have that pipeline of things. Well, here's some artwork that we would like to reimagine. Or somebody has extra dev cycles. Okay, here's a backlog of like low priority bugs, or just kind of like housekeeping, if you will, some maintenance to be done. Maurice, can we get a new Christmas event? Eh? Like the Toboggan Hill. I don't know. We'll see. We just iterated on the Christmas event not too long ago. If I can dig out here, I think we have a pretty good stash of feedback. Not to go too far off topic, but that is one of the important parts of this whole cycle, especially with events. Is during an event we have a feedback document that we're just constantly kind of keeping tabs on, and then even to go into our scheduling process a little bit. Like for instance, Halloween's just around the corner. And so just last week I was reviewing the feedback document for Halloween. And that got scheduled, so I didn't forget to do it. It isn't all of a sudden it's October. It's like, oh right, Halloween's coming. In June, that starts to get on my radar to look over that feedback. There's a task assigned to me, and then I kind of go into this phase here, and I put together a proposal, if you will, of here's all the things that, based on last year's Halloween, we may want to do differently this year based on player feedback. And I put that together and I pitch it to the team, and then everyone's free as well to kind of poke holes in it. It's an opportunity. Just everybody can have a voice if they're inclined to do so as well. Whether it's threading on instant messaging platform, sometimes it's a Google Doc, which is very convenient. The whole team can add comments there, and whoever's sort of owning the design of that, it's a great way to kind of help get all the feedback from the team and kind of massage it all together, and ultimately decide on the final version of something. But this year's version of Halloween is kind of in this phase right now, and actually next week it kind of enters this phase where now all the tasks are scheduled. Many of them have been delegated now, and we're ready to enter the production phase of Halloween 2023. And, those are things that have a little bit of a shorter cycle than, say, the Folklore Forest. It took 10 months to build. Halloween will probably only be, a month of work to put together this version of Halloween. Hey, you should do something different for Ron's been stagnant for a while. It's good feedback to keep in mind as well. But, in some ways, some things are nice, just being small, predictable things. She's not too, not too game not too game changing. It's mostly a way to earn some upgrades, but the actual gameplay there is, it's meant to kind of be short and sweet for sure. Often we just kind of, strike when the iron's hot. When the right idea presents itself, it's a lot easier to act fast. But, sometimes it's a little bit nebulous. Just, it should be different is kind of not a very strong idea as much as a proposal of, well, what should be different. Tyler, how often do you look and iterate based on different ideas hunters put out there? Certainly it happens a lot of good food for thought, a lot of creative inspiration. Even I think back to the fungal cavern. I think it didn't end up anything kind of like how a hunter described it once upon a time, but often it's a launching point. As I've often said too, when we read feedback, we often don't read it right at at face value. We always think like, why? What is the underlying sentiment? When somebody shares feedback or a comment, and I think this applies to a lot of things outside even just to creative spaces, why is somebody saying that? And then often there might be different options to address, scratch that same itch, but in a different way, if that makes sense. Mad Cat, you thought Leaping Lavish was already prepared ahead of time, eh? There was an iteration where you could kind of shuffle your rooms, kind of like a shuffler's cube, but it just wasn't very interesting. And so that thought kind of came afterwards, and after the kind of getting feedback from players playing through it. And then ultimately, Dev Norm put together a very rudimentary version of it. No art assets required, totally hacked that thing onto the HUD, just kind of quick and dirty. It's like, well, what do you think? Now I've got a cheese, and I take many steps when I hunt with it. If it didn't work out, cool, I can just throw away all that work. But he put it together just quick and dirty, and it even let us play with different versions. Well, okay, what if it takes 4 steps? What if it takes 5 steps? What if it takes 10 steps? What if it takes 40 steps? Just kind of play around. Okay, what if I make it absolutely something absurd? What does that do? I was like, yep, okay, it is absurd. Okay, dial it back. And often that's a big part of Jacob's process. If he's not sure how strong something should be, he'll make it way too strong to kind of see where the limit is. It's like, okay, that's too much, pull it back. What time is it as well? 1:33, all right. Our Feedback Friday topics planned as well, or is you just done on a weekly basis? For the most part, a weekly basis. Sometimes we have a rough plan of when we might fit something in there, but it kind of depends. Often it's things that come up in conversation with the team as well, help us kind of decide what we should be doing. Maurice, cool insight into the event planning like Halloween. And, that might be good feedback to have as well. Kind of referring back to this, maybe when we touch base on roadmap, just kind of showing, hey, these are the phases that, everything in the roadmap currently is at. And, maybe over the long term with an understanding of kind of the phases everything goes through, that might even increase just the transparency of where everything's at. Fern, you mentioned the floating island spreadsheet was the biggest you've ever had. Can you say what was the file size? I don't know off the top of my head. I'm not on my work machine to even quickly load it up, but there's a lot of numbers in there. MX, is there an area or feature that is your personal favorite because you implemented or suggested it? When all's said and done, everything ends up being a team effort, and whoever kind of pitches that original spark, without fail, it looks absolutely nothing like the original proposal by the time the whole creative team kind of gets their creative hands on it, and it just becomes better and better and better and better as everyone kind of adds their own, plays to their own unique strengths. Often my proposals are very boring looking text with some numbers in it and bullet point lists. And then Jacob will come through, or, an artist or anyone who's creatively talented in the space of making artwork, and he'll visualize it with some icons and some characters, and all of a sudden it looks a lot more fun. And so everyone brings kind of their unique strengths to the creative process. So by the end of it, it really is, more than the sum of its parts, and it doesn't look anything like that original pitch. Potato, are there any major changes planned for Halloween? That might be a little off topic for today, but there's a few things I think we touched base on maybe actually a couple weeks ago with how incense works, how the boon works. I think players found a little bit awkward as well, but maybe a little closer to Halloween we'll go over that. All right, well, alas, I gotta make sure to keep things a little bit brief actually, because I have a meeting in the not too distant future here. So we will cut to the trivia question for this week. And, I was trying to find something that was creative process related, and this was the first thing that popped into mind. And it was, what player creative idea never became an area, but nevertheless became part of the game's lore? We got to go way back in the memory banks for this one. Michelle. How appropriate that Michelle gets the correct answer. That is correct. It's the salt mines. It was the salt mines. Alas, not Franco's shop. That's not actually in the game, right? That's just kind of, it's a gag. It's a community. It's just a running joke out there in the game's community, but nowhere in the game is Franco's shop present. And I think we're all thankful for that, because I don't think those would be good deals. We'd be getting scammed in that shop. There'd be mystery cheddar for 1,000,000 gold each, and the mystery is it works exactly like cheddar works. That would be a Franco shop item. Yet. I'll put this link in the chat as well for your clicking convenience. Look at that. I haven't even claimed it yet. Thank you, Larry. Thank you, Larry. I'm getting a reminder that I got to leave soon for a meeting. Look at that. But the salt mines, and hey, it's an example. There's a lot of, always keeping our ear to the ground, and it's providing creative inspiration, creative energy as well. And maybe even that's just good food for thought as well. Just, put out there for players is often it's kind of your comments and your enthusiasm that kind of refills the creative tank, so to speak. It puts some gas back into our creative tanks. And, often that's kind of where we look for when we're kind of, we're in a bit of a creative slump. It's often very helpful just to pour through various player comments and everything. And so, we keep our ear to the ground, and that just kind of helps shape things, even on a subconscious level. Just, temperature checking things. It's a big role Feedback Friday plays as well. Often I just kind of leave with just sync up the sentiment between, players and devs a little bit, and just kind of help push our creative energy into where there's enthusiasm. It's a little bit like a dowsing rod. We're just kind of following where the enthusiasm goes. And, a big part of that is keeping our ear to the ground and having some touch points as often as we can. Well, Hunters, I hope you enjoyed a little sneak peek at some of the creative processes that go into producing events and areas and what have you. Like I said, kind of just keep the conversation going. Let us know if this is something you like to see on Feedback Friday. Maybe it's something, every once in a while. Like I said, like this week, we kind of covered the bases of everything that we have working on. Often if somebody on the team has a question, they're not quite sure of a direction to take, that's good inspiration for a Feedback Friday topic. And, this week we were a little low on those things. I didn't have very much to go on. So we thought we'd try this out. And, hey, maybe that could be, if it's something hunters enjoy, that could be one more option that we have available on Feedback Friday, is to kind of look, okay, any specific release, what phase in the creative process is it at? And we could get feedback on that release at that stage with kind of a better understanding of how everything puts together or comes together. Roxanne, alas, it was not a rib. Cloud, glad you enjoyed it. Glad you found it interesting. Michelle, you have yourself a fantastic weekend as well. Thanks for the well wishes. Potato, glad you enjoyed it. Dallas, all right, seems like there was some enjoyment. Well, let us know as well. We always, like I said, we lurk. We keep our ear to the ground with different Facebook groups, on the fan page, on the Discord server. A lot of the devs kind of spread out, and we tend to listen more than we chat for the most part, just to kind of absorb sentiments, unfiltered. You liked seeing how you prototype things? Good to know. Maybe we can kind of share some prototypes a little bit more often too. Maybe we can find a spot in the creative process to just get food for thought, do temperature checks, see what overall sentiments are. All right, well, I do need to wrap things up. I'm going to, for once, be somewhat punctual here, and yet I look up, it's been 52 minutes. So I think I will take my exit. I do have a meeting to get to on this fine Friday here. Have yourself a wonderful weekend, everybody. Thank you for joining me. Happy hunting. I know there's a long weekend coming up in the not too distant future. Labor Day is kind of around the corner, so there might be a gap in Feedback Friday, but I'm pretty sure that's not next weekend. Right? No, it's not. So I think it'll probably be Jacob joining in next week. And if I don't see you until then, have a great one. Happy hunting, everybody. I'll see you next time.
You're a trap, don't seem to mind it. You attract me, I'm a mouse, you're a cat. I don't seem to mind it. Soft and furry, oh, and just when I think I'm safe, snap. Turns out I'm never safe, snap. Just when you think you're safe, snap. I come back. You don't seem to mind it, but I'm a fool. Broke my back. You don't seem to mind it, 'cause you're so cool. And just when I think I'm safe, snap. Turns out I'm never safe, snap. Ooh. And just when you think you're safe, snap.